Hiwatt Leeds 25R is a budget-friendly solid-state amp carrying the Hiwatt name, but does it live up to its legacy? I've known Hiwatt for years, haven't really played through any at all over the years. I've seen them on stage, but if you know British rock tone, you'll kind of know Hiwatt. It's definitely a brand synonymous with over there. Their amps have been used by honestly some of the biggest names over the years, including David Gilmour, Pete Townsend, Jimmy Page even as well. They're really, for me, known for their kind of high headroom, punchy cleans, and if you want to crank them up as well, you get like kind of rich harmonic drive. But historically, they built a reputation as some of the best amps for players who want that dynamic, responsive tones, not too mushy, definitely having that punch factor and kind of handle anything you can throw at it. Fantastic pedal kind of platform. You'll hear in a bit, like this amp can go from good crystal clear cleans to heavy overdrive, and this is one of their budget kind of transistor type amps. But to kind of understand what makes a Hiwatt amp special, you have to go back to where it kind of all started. So I'll go through a brief history because I didn't know a lot about them, and so I thought I'd just relay some of the stuff I'd found. If you don't want to know any of this stuff, just skip on and get to the tones and the specs and things like that. But Hiwatt was founded in 1966 by Dave Reeves. He was actually a British engineer who had already made himself, designing amplifiers for Sound City, if you remember those. And Reeves was obsessed with that kind of build quality and reliability. This is the kind of golden age of amplifiers, with it being, Marshall started going around this kind of time. So his amps were kind of known for that military-grade wiring. He was obsessive about it, really. Huge transformers and ultra-clean circuitry. These amps could be cranked incredibly loud without breaking up, and that was completely different to what other brands were going for at the time, where they were going for the opposite, where they were trying to make it sound crunchy and break it up. So they were quickly this kind of staple for bands that needed to cut through on stage, before the days of miking everything up. Like, this got you volume but didn't get it kind of crunching up. So Pete Townsend, of The Who, was one of Hiwatt's kind of earliest adopters, using them to power his iconic kind of live sound. Followed closely by David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, who turned Hiwatt into an essential part of his legendary tone. He was definitely more of a clean player to start with, and kind of got a bit more experimental with effects and phasers and other kind of tones later. But by the 70s, Hiwatt was one of the most kind of respected amp brands for the quality in the world, to be honest. One of their more famous ones is the Custom 100, the DR103, and the DR504 models, becoming kind of legendary for their really powerful punchy cleans and rich harmonic breakup when pushed. I think of them in a similar brand bracket to the kind of AC30s, etc. Weirdly enough, that wasn't all there is to tell in that story. So things kind of took a real shit turn in 1981 when Reeves actually tragically quickly passed away. And then at this point, it kind of lost traction and kind of went a bit weird. So Hiwatt changed hands multiple times, and for a period, the brand kind of lost some of its original prestige that it had had from him. At one point, it was even owned by Music Ground, which is a company with quite a bad reputation in the guitar community, to be honest. And so I feel at that point, with Dave dying and stuff, it kind of drifted from popularity and kind of disappeared, really, apart from people that had the older amplifiers. So, and recently, actually, about 8-9 years ago, in 2016, two Canadians, actually, Darren Atkinson and Alexander Back, took over Hiwatt and relaunched it in 2018, trying to, revitalise that kind of classic British craftsmanship that made these amps famous in the first place. Since then, they've actually expanded the lineup with hand-wired UK custom shop amps and affordable kind of, built-in Asia models like these, which brings us to the amp I'm checking out today. So this Hiwatt Leeds 25R. Leeds is a town in Yorkshire. I don't know if there's anything to do with that, but I'm from Lancashire originally, so that's a bit interesting to me to find something that sounds so good from Yorkshire. This is 25 watts of solid-state amp head with a built-in reverb, which most amps seem to come within this bracket, and it's a very simple, no-frills design, but I quite like it. It's simple, understated, and delivers, actually. We'll hear it shortly in a bit. 2 channels, clean and an overdrive, and 3-band EQ with a contour knob for that kind of extra tone shaping to give you that mid-range kind of punch. The reverb is built in, so you've just got a knob to crank it. It sounds a bit like a hall reverb, not really sure what kind it is. Kind of usable. Aux in and headphone out as well, and speaker outs are 4 and 8 ohm, which lacks the 16 ohm, which was a bit weird. We'll come on to that in a sec. Compact, very light, small, affordable. This is like under 200 bucks Canadian, so really cheap. Designed to bring British style tones to players who don't want or need a massive tube amp to look around. I think this would go perfect with a little 1x12 or something like that. When it comes to performance and tone, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what to expect from this amp. Ted at Guitar Works just kind of handed it to me and said, have a go and see what you think of this one. So 80% of it I've been blown away with by how good it sounds for the price. Phenomenal, to be honest. The clean tones are fantastic with that signature kind of Hiwatt clarity and punch. The high gain tones are surprisingly great for a non-valve amp. I was surprised beyond belief of that one. I was able to get full, rich distortion with minimal tweaking, pretty much down the middle. I've got it, and we'll start with that as we go through. Where I found it struggled a little bit, I don't know why, but the kind of middle, kind of low, mid gain, there's a bit of a sizzle in the overdrive that doesn't quite have the smooth breakup of what you might suspect from a tube amp. Or when you get to high gain, you don't get any of that kind of sound to it. So when you're just kind of petering on the edge of breakup is when it kind of struggles a bit. But that's me nitpicking. You probably wouldn't notice too much on stage. But if you're using it for clean tones and heavier distortion, I was blown away by it. So the contour knob was interesting. Doesn't do too much in terms of like big range, but I quite like it when amps don't give you a full range. It gives you that kind of usable shape. You can kind of push that where you want to in the mid-range depending on what input you've got. For humbuckers it's more useful. You might not need it as much for single coils, but we'll play through both of those. I found I could dial in some excellent sounds without much effort, to be honest. Volume-wise, these little amps around the 20-25 watt really deliver and punch. Most things are mic'd up nowadays when you play live, but for rehearsal and practice, like it would be fine. It's pretty loud for a solid state amp and would hold its own at practice, etc. Now, there are a couple of quirks with this amp that are worth mentioning. The headphone... Sorry, I went northern then. The headphone out mutes the speaker, which makes sense because you don't want to be deafened by the amp, and it makes it so you can play it at night. I found the sound through the headphones was really not great. Like, it's fine for having just as practice to something to play through, but it's quite a brittle kind of sound. So if you just need to practice quietly, but you're not, I don't think you're buying this amp for headphone use anyway. It would have been nice to have a dedicated headphone volume control as well, to just volume, because otherwise you have to change the volumes of the stuff here. Not that it matters too much, but once you've dialed it in, you might be like, I don't really want to touch much now. The aux input is weird. It feels a little bit outdated now that most phones don't even have headphone jacks. Simple Bluetooth connectivity would have been much more useful just to sync my phone to it. The speaker output, as I mentioned before, the logic is a bit strange. There's no 16 ohm out, only 4 and 8 ohm options. Luckily, I was able to split my 4x12, which is going through the Marshall cab, to 8 ohms as a stereo. But in my world, the 16 ohm cabs, they are quite prevalent. So I think having option for 3 would have been useful. I don't know if it's not possible, but would have been nice to have that flexibility. And while we're talking about features, a direct out with a cab sim would have been a better inclusion than an aux in and a headphone to me. You could have this direct recording out or run into a PA. That would be much more useful, and it's becoming more expected on amplifiers. So quick modification, really, I think. So for tones, etc., I'm going to go through a couple of guitars. So I'm going to do humbucker, which is the PRS, not the cheapest of guitars, but it's a good input to check the quality of the amp. And then I'm also going to play through Telecaster as well to give you that kind of single coil feel, because I find with a Telecaster you can kind of see and hear things that you might not on other ones. It's quite a transparent, honest kind of guitar to play through. So let's go through some clean tones with each of the guitars, and then we'll go through some kind of crunch sounds, and then you'll also get some high gain stuff to listen to. So thanks. Here's some nice chords to play through, see what things sound like. That's a nice bass clean sound. We haven't got any like crunchy stuff that we can add to the clean. We can drive the volume a bit. Which means we can get, a bit more of that overdriven kind of sound. to get that put back to clean. Everything's in the middle for EQ, so we'll just sweep through now, playing through on the clean channel. Middle. Treble. You get a nice range of stuff. I found just having things pushed a bit on the bass and middle a bit, and then the treble seemed to be okay in the middle, to be honest. Okay, let's try with the reverb on there. That's the bass tone, quarter of the way up. Halfway up. Let's go to the extreme of reverb, so it sounds like. Interesting sounds. Okay, very usable kind of tones. Nicely done. So we'll start with kind of a low gain setting here. So a slight fizzle to it. Some people like that sound. It's not my cup of tea normally. Bear with me, as we increase more gain, you really see where this amp kind of shines. So if we go through the contour thing here with this, And I feel like that gives it almost like a mid-scoop kind of, you know, the EQ dropped in the middle. I seem to find keeping it in the middle gives it a nice balance across all of it. It's nice you have separate kind of controls, this kind of channel selector switch kind of splits. So you've got this bit here that seems to control this section with the crunch and the high gain. And then the EQ covers this as well. So it really depends what sound you're going after, really. So I found a bit of middle push, bass push a bit more was nice for the crunch. So let's crank the gain a little bit more. Let's get it up to like 1 o'clock-ish. See what this kind of sounds like here. It's pretty chunky to me. Impressive. Let's push the gain a little bit further, turn the treble down just a touch. Some leady tones now. So right up to the high gain now. Let's go full whack, see what happens here. Delay off. surprisingly good. Full whack gain now. At the end of the day, the Hiwatt Leeds 25R is an unreal kind of steal for the money. If you are looking for that Hiwatt style, the tones without the price tag, this amp really is worth your time looking at. I would even order it and buy it just to get it. It's not a lot of money. It delivers in all the places, like the clean and the high gain sounds are unreal. It's surprisingly loud, and the tone shaping options work well with the EQ and the contour. Would I recommend it? I think it's a good steal, actually, for a budget-friendly amp. And there's loads of others in the range that are bigger, more complicated, loads of stuff going on. But that classic kind of British sound is really well done here. Before I wrap this up, I want to give a huge thanks to Guitarworks. They always support the channel, and they're in Canada lending me this amp. So check them out. They do free delivery, I think. They are a Hiwatt dealer. If you've played through this amp or any other modern Hiwatt models, I'd love to know in the comments. This is a great place for people to get insight and, long-term users. I only get this amp for a little bit of time to play, so there's only so much I can put through its paces, but I do play through it for a few hours and check it's all what it can do and what the pros and cons of it. So since Hiwatt has so many different product lines, I'd love to hear what other players think and how these compare to the classics if you've got that comparison available. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much.